Επιστρέφουμε στη σκηνή του συνεδρίου, του έκτου συνεδρίου για τη διαφορετικότητα στις ελληνικές επιχειρήσεις. Όπως καταλάβατε και από την ομιλία της Ελένη, η αποδοχή της διαφορετικότητας δεν είναι μόνο ελληνικό ζήτημα. Γι' αυτό και ετοιμάσαμε για εσάς ένα πρωτότυπο και διαφορετικό πάνελ. Στο FIRESIDE chat με τίτλο «Promoting Diversity Across Borders», μέσα από μια δημιουργική συζήτηση που θα συντονίσει η έμπειρη προσκεκλημένη μας Ελένα, οι πρέσβεις και πρέσβυρες σημαντικών χωρών θα μοιραστούν μαζί μας τις πολιτικές διαχείρισης της διαφορετικότητας και ένταξης που εφαρμόζουν στις χώρες τους, καθώς και την πρόκληση ενσωμάτωσης αυτών των πρακτικών στη δική μας τη χώρα. Προσκαλώ αμέσως στο βήμα την Ελένη Μπάνερ και μαζί της την Miss Maria Olsen, Deputy Chief of Mission US Embassy, Laurence Auer, Ambassador of France, Naomi Yorks, Deputy Head of Mission, Embassy of the Netherlands. Please, the stage is yours.
Thank you very much, Katerina. Thank you for your warm applause and welcome. It is really an honor, Excellencies, to share the stage with you. What a power panel of fantastic ladies also here at this Diversity in Business conference. Thank you so much to making the time to make diversity and inclusion a priority today on your agenda and joining us on this conference today. We would like, with this panel, to open up your horizon and your perspective beyond Athens and beyond the Greek borders towards Europe. We have the French ambassador here, towards the Netherlands, and of course to the US. With Maria Olsen here next to me, I would like to start with you. We have Maria Olsen, you are the Deputy Ambassador of the US Embassy here in Athens. And you are also having extensive international experience. You had posts in Russia, Syria, Burundi, Jordan, and you've joined the US State Department in Washington in 1998. So many years of a successful career as a woman and mom as well in your service. You are also an expert in this region. You are the Deputy Ambassador here in Greece since last year. And I would like to start with you, Maria, from the US perspective. What does diversity mean to you? If you think about it from a US perspective, perhaps also from your personal perspective, having traveled so many countries and having been in so many regions.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Good. So first of all, it's a real honor to be here. I'm delighted to see such a diverse audience. Oftentimes when I go to panel discussions and to conferences in Greece, it's quite a male audience, and we constantly try to encourage women speakers and women participants. So bravo to the organizers and to all of the guests. I think, look, what diversity means to me, coming from the United States, obviously the United States is a country of immigrants. People have arrived over successive generations, right? And we have people who've come from Europe, from all over the world. And so there is that aspect. I think, though, we talk about also diversity in our foreign policy. And so one of the things that we talk about at this moment, when this terrible war launched by Russia 2 years ago into Ukraine, which has cost the lives of 12,000 civilians and injured another 25,000, we talk about what are the consequences and what steps can we diplomatically take to prevent similar incidents like that. So one of our policy priorities here in Greece and in the rest of Europe is energy diversification, because if you're beholden to a country to provide your energy, that restrains you in the political sector. So that is one place where we've really worked with the government of Greece, which is actually taking a leadership position on this in Europe. So the Prime Minister talks a lot about the vertical corridor or the South-North corridor, which is trying to bring liquefied natural gas from the Aegean and then up through Greece, Bulgaria, Romania, Moldova to Ukraine. So that's kind of a policy focus way to talk about diversity. But of course, there are other more social elements that we'll talk about a little bit later.
And we will come to that.
Yes.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for your US perspective, also working here in Greece, shining out. And I would like to turn to you, Ambassador. We are very honored to be with Laurence Auer here from the Ambassador of France here in Greece. Thank you so much for coming. You are the ambassador here since last year, and you have beforehand served as the French ambassador to Romania and Bucharest and North Macedonia as well. You were also a senior advisor to many French ministers. You were the deputy spokesperson to Jacques Chirac at the time, very, very prestigious post, also at the European Commission. Such a diverse and successful career. What does diversity mean to you, having traveled so many countries, seen so many places? But we would, of course, love to hear it, especially from your French perspective, diversity. Thank you.
So for the French, especially when you are posted in a European country such as Greece, it's a policy. It's a policy that we develop under the United Nations, under, of course, the EU. We had last year the implementation of a very important piece of legislation throughout Europe to put women quota on boards. But it's also something which is more on a practical aspect, because we are having a community of French companies, and we feel very much that they can, by their activities, their attitude, their plan for inclusion, being little by little in the country where we are, they can share some values on inclusion. Of course, we have an arsenal of rules in France. We've been having a charter of diversity for the last 20 years. We're having regulation over 20 persons engaged. You have to hire for sure a handicapped person. Over 20, over 50, you are obliged to have an inclusion plan in your company, but it's not enough. We are, as diplomats abroad, being able to commit, to engage, especially because we believe that performance is better when inclusion is going forward. So for instance, here with the Chamber of Commerce and with our new entry, which is called French Tech, we started with women in tech, women and inclusion. We have a committee for inclusion in the Chamber of Commerce, and we discuss about that. It's to commit. It's about prejudices, and I can come again about the practical tools we have with us as ambassadors. It's not only the companies themselves, it's us as a community in Europe.
Thank you so much for expanding on that. So there's really an international community here as well in Athens, fighting and standing up for equality, for inclusion. So lots of points where I'm sure many people can also come together and work together. I would like to introduce you to Naomi Yorks. Thank you so much for coming. You are the Deputy Head of Mission of the Embassy of the Netherlands, the Deputy Ambassador here. You just joined this summer, so welcome to Athens. And you have been in the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs since 2011, working in stations in The Hague, Iran, Costa Rica. And we would love to hear from your Dutch perspective what diversity means in the Netherlands and for you here as Deputy Ambassador.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me, everyone. Good afternoon.
Could you bring your microphone a bit closer? Yeah.
Should I keep
Thank
it?
you.
Oh, yes, there I am. Good afternoon, everyone. Well, you mentioned I've worked in several countries. I mean, Iran and Costa Rica, both each with their unique challenges when it comes to diversity. But for Holland, for the Dutch, we have a very specific feminist foreign policy, is what we officially call it. We launched this foreign policy in 2022. It is an integral part of all of our foreign policy. It was an official letter sent to Parliament, and it's based on the 4 R's. Now I have to remember them, of course. The rights of women, just the basic human rights of women, need to be respected. Representation, the importance of the representation of women, but also vulnerable groups other than women and girls, a seat at the table, so to say. The resources need to be freed up to ensure that women, girls, but also other vulnerable groups get what they need. And then the reality check, because we do realize that it's easy to formulate such a policy, but doesn't work in all parts of the world. So we need to make sure that what we do as a policy works with the reality on the ground. So these 4 R's together make up our feminist foreign policy, which is really integral to everything we do in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and in turn in the embassies. So in the embassy here in Athens, we really look at diversity from a very holistic point of view, in panels such as these, in the projects that we support, in the events that we organize, that we attend. We make sure that the guest lists to our attends really represent a broader group of people, of companies, male, female, different ethnicities. So it's something that we live and breathe, so to say.
Fantastic and very inspiring to hear also about your priority on feminist foreign policy. Thank you for expanding on that. And we heard about so many initiatives that you are actually doing as embassies here in Athens, here in Greece. And I would like to turn back to you, Maria. We know, and I felt very inspired by that the 4th of July celebrations that you hosted here in Athens this summer, one of the core topics was inclusion and inclusivity. And I also know it's very dear personally to your heart. You're very passionate about inclusion. Can you tell us a little bit more about the work that you're doing here and perhaps also why it is very close to your heart personally?
So our July 4th event, our Independence Day event, is our biggest diplomatic celebration of the year. And it's an opportunity for us to share with a large group of guests and with the media what our policy priorities are and what our values are. And so this year, when we were talking about what our theme would be, we decided that we would focus on inclusivity, accessibility, and education. The reason for that is because here in Greece, as we're working very closely with the host government, we're talking about this incredible economic success story that Greece has seen, right? The economy is booming after a very long and difficult financial period. At the same time, the population of Greece, we're reading about how it is going to fall off a population cliff. It's the 5th fastest aging country in the world. And so how do you run an economy if you don't have a continuing workforce, right? And so this policy priority goes hand in hand with our values agenda. So we decided that we would focus on inclusive, accessible education as a policy issue, and we are in the process of writing grants to help educators teach to all of the kids in their class here in Greece. Here in Greece. At the same time, we said, okay, if we're going to message this at our July 4th event, can we actually do it at our ambassador's residence, which is a beautiful residence, but it has this sloping lawn, not accessible at all bathrooms. Anybody who has any kind of mobility, or frankly, if you're a woman wearing high-heeled shoes, it's not very fun to go to an event that's on grass. And so we decided to move it into an accessible venue next to our embassy, which is the Megaron, which is a beautiful facility. And we really thought about the guests that we're inviting, is everybody actually able to say yes to this event, right? So that's why we switched venues. But then we thought about, okay, our invitations, are they accessible to people who have visual issues, right? And I will say that in the course of this, you know, as a diplomat, I want and my team knows, my wonderful team who's sitting there, I want everything to be perfect, right? And one of the challenges of doing something different is that you're going to get things wrong. But I think we did manage to pull off our first event of this kind at this scale, and I felt quite proud that we had, you know, a speaker who was a wheelchair user, I think for the first time in our event, and we had a singer who was visually impaired. The point being making people with disabilities even if they're invisible disabilities, visible is so important.
Thank you so much, Ambassador, Deputy Ambassador, for making diversity inclusion a top priority at your event and sharing also how it is not easy always to push this topic to the top. And also, and let us also acknowledge all of us, that it's going to be messy sometimes, or it's going to be imperfect when we try. But I think everybody will always recognize that we try. And so thank you so much for this great story of how you thought about how to make it inclusive. It's very, very inspiring. Thank you for doing that on behalf of the US here in Athens. And let me turn to the French ambassador, Ambassador O'Hare, for talking about impact maybe on women in leadership roles. You mentioned the work of the Chamber of Commerce, and we also know, by the way, France has been one of the first countries in Europe to sign the Diversity Charter, and we want to congratulate you also for your 20th anniversary this year. Thank you for your work that you're doing. We would love to hear what impact you're feeling, and maybe you can give us examples on your work here in Greece.
Yeah, thank you. We came as well to the point of adopting feminist diplomacy with a group of countries. There was this summit, United Nations. There is the International Labour Organization as well. You have all those human rights regulations which actually helped us to formulate some elements. Some are soft, some are hard in the law in France and abroad. But I would say that what is the most important today is to understand that we switch from public policies to private sector easily on this inclusion dimension. Public policies were first very strong in the case of France in putting quotas and putting women as an equality basis on all the public sectors. For instance, when you are recruited, when you are nominated, and not only on lists, but to have effective managers and as well to have training to help, mentorship, etc. Then from this, it was a label that all the French administration approved after a law which is about women being inclusive into the public sector, which we switched to another label that was created 5 years later. It started in 2015 in the public sector always, which was the label on generally diversity and inclusion. I told you before that we had regulations. We were obliged to recruit handicapped persons and to have a charter, but it was not that way that the sector and the working tools were improved. For instance, as Mary says, we had problems of access, we had problems in some of the countries. We could not designate an ambassador who had suffered a severe handicap, etc. And so this was helped by a lot of education and a lot of principles that we little by little included in our public way of doing. But I must say, and that's why I'm so happy to be here with you, that the private sector was a driving force. And it was more actually accepted in the private sector in France more easily, because at some point it was taken as a performance tool. Inclusion was part of the performance of the company. And that's why maybe we managed to have this regulation, European regulation on women on boards. When I arrived here 1 year ago, I thought, okay, it was approved and implemented so quickly that we will have the same in the public sector. And as we have a very strong training program with ECDA and the public sector, I thought that's going to be very easy. We are going to push for training on inclusion, training on feminist attitude, the famous label, you know, you don't have a panel without half of the panelists who are women. You don't have a recruitment without having, I'm not speaking about quota because Greece is far from that, but at least to have this attitude. And then I realized it was actually very difficult because of economic crisis, as Mary said, as Naomi said, because actually when we developed this feminist diplomacy, we tried our best always to twin one country, strong country, France, with Costa Rica. And that was maybe very awkward for everybody. But when we arrived to the summit, it was in June 22, there were strong countries in terms of economic growth, etc. And southern countries, we were with Mexico, with Costa Rica, and we were twinning all the time to actually share the best practices and so on. And then maybe that's going to be for another part of my speech, but it's about the tools. And here again, I feel that we shared a lot from the private sector, the management tools from the public management now are completely from the private sector. So what about training? Because if you take diversity as a whole, what it is, it's about prejudices, stereotypes, and all the society is sharing the same type of problem. So in my previous post and in all my posts, I knew I would be taken as a model because I'm here in an authority perspective. I have these posts and I have this experience. And I always said my objective is not only to be representing my country as a woman and as a European country, it's also to be able to share it and having all those bridges in the civil society, but also in the innovation companies, for instance, defense company. And it works quite well, and it works very well in Greece in the innovation sector. So congratulations for all those very strong new orientations that goes in the working place, because it will change the country at the end.
Thank you so much for this fantastic message that the private sector is often taking the lead or can make changes more quickly, and that everything that you may be doing in your sector will have ripple effects and ripple effects back to the public sector, to regulation. So thank you for this great example on making it a KPI, even a performance indicator, to having more women, more diversity in leadership boards. May I turn to you, Deputy Ambassador, on talking about feminist foreign policy and also perhaps what you can share with us from the private sector in the Netherlands. What are typically the hurdles that you are facing promoting diversity? Because we know there are lots of barriers to doing that still. Can you share a little bit about that, or success stories where you say we have overcome that, we have come further?
Thank you very much. I think that's an important question, and that allows me to be a little bit critical about my own country as well. The Netherlands is known for its diversity. We have the diversity charter is signed by over 300 companies and organizations, so we're doing very well in that. But I think it's important when you strive towards a goal to also be clear on what is still missing, what is still lacking. And one of the things that always, stand out, I think, in the Netherlands is our part-time culture. We are world champions in part-time working, which is wonderful for many working moms like myself. But it's also risky. It means that in practice, women are, over half of the Dutch working age population works part-time. 70% of that is comprised of women. Wonderful on paper, but in practice it means that your career opportunities, your pension, and your dependency on men is greater. You risk, after having children, coming back to the workforce, you risk lower wages, fewer career opportunities, and more dependency. So this is something that is wonderful on paper, but very risky in practice and makes women more dependent. I think this is something that there's a lot of debate about this in the Netherlands. How do we do this? Because on one hand, we're so proud and happy about this, that we have the opportunity to do it. On the other hand, we see, both from a labor force point of view, we don't have enough people. So if women would work more, we would actually, alleviate the labor market a little bit. But for that to happen, we need systemic change. We need to change the way that we've arranged our entire system, meaning childcare, meaning healthcare, meaning your allowances, making it profitable to actually work more. These are the things that we are currently debating, have been debating for 10 years, and each new government takes it on as a challenge. It's extremely hard to change because it's a cultural thing. One of the things that surprised, I would say shocked me, is that in a recent survey by the Central Bureau of Statistics in the Netherlands, 80% of the Dutch people that were interviewed said that women should stay at home when they have a newborn. That's quite a high number, and it's quite a steep challenge to overcome if you're a woman and you want to or have to go back to work immediately after having a child. So that is something, and allow me to be a bit critical about my own country. We have many things to be proud of, but this is definitely something that we are working on, that we need working on, and that we can actually learn from other countries.
So in order to achieve diversity and inclusion, we need support by many other policy areas as well, social policy, health policy.
Absolutely.
It's not possible on their own as an own entity, right?
It's not something that you can do in isolation. Absolutely not.
Yeah. Would one of you like to come in on the hurdles we're facing, on the challenges we're facing to move on and move further?
So let me talk about kind of a policy-related issue, and then I'll talk about a personal issue. I think we too have companies that are investing in Greece, that are looking for opportunities, and one of the pieces that the private sector brings with it is a desire to recruit and retain diverse workforce talent. And so we have several companies that are in the tech field up in Thessaloniki, and come to us and say, we're really having to work hard to recruit, a diverse workforce. And so they have taken a number of steps to try to boost the confidence and the capabilities of the workforce. So Deloitte in Greece launched the Alexander Competence Center back in 2018, which trained more than 1,300 professionals for entry into kind of technical careers. And then Pfizer, Deloitte, and our American Hellenic Chamber of Commerce, EY and Accenture and Chubb have created this Women in Tech network because, of course, the tech companies want to recruit and retain women. There are a lot of wonderful universities in Thessaloniki and across Greece, but like bringing young women into the workforce and keeping them in the tech sector is very important. So from the personal perspective, I will say that I'm quite privileged to work as a diplomat. I've been in the field for 26 years. I think our ministry does a really great job of recruiting diplomats from all across the United States, from different class backgrounds, from genders. I will say that when diplomats come into the diplomatic service, you see a pretty even balance of women and men. But as you proceed up the career rank, women fall off. And so when you reach, sort of my level for the last 5 to 10 years, you really see fewer women when you have high-level meetings. And I have to say that I wasn't sure how much of an impact that actually had on me until under the Biden administration. I think there was a real conscious effort to recruit women in leadership positions, and I remember the first time that I was in these meetings and I was seeing so many women, and personally, for me, I felt this little boost inside. It was like, if they can do it, I can do it. And so I was surprised by that. I didn't think that unconscious aspect would affect me, but it did.
Thank you so much for sharing the personal story as well, because, as we say, when you can do it, we can all do it. You are inspiring us by sharing. And yes, it feels so good sometimes to be at conferences like this, where we are also with, let me say this, like-minded people, to get a little bit of support, to also recharge and not having to play a role. That is very, very important for our confidence, shining in our full light. Thank you. And Ambassador, would you like to comment on the challenges? Because afterwards I would love to ask you about your
Yes.
personal experience as well.
So challenges are huge, especially I would say in a country like Greece, because of different reasons. You know, it was not only economic crisis; it's also because of the structure of the families. It's also about the existence of a diaspora. So a lot of people went, and as Naomi and Mary said, the challenges in France or in our countries are the same. So I would say that all type of changes are interesting to consider. On an individual base, you can recruit and try to recruit some people, for instance, from the handicap sector. That's what I did in my previous embassy. And try to train your team to that inclusion perspective, and it will be useful for the rest of their career. Then you can, as I said, use plenty of different tools, codes of conduct, charter of sharing of the time. You can use actually, I was insisting here in Greece last time we met EGDA, that we could do training, for instance, on harassment online. It's not, you're not obliged to put everybody in a room and say, okay, we are French, we have experts, and we are going to tell you what is moral and harassment or sexual harassment. On LGBT, it's different because, of course, your country has reached to a point that there is a law on marriage, so there is a loss of exposure. And I remember a very interesting experience that I had in a previous post where the company decided to put a wall and all the threads of their employees being like that. So every minute we were seeing that LGBT sharing of those values were important to everybody. And it was, for me, so inspiring that I used them for my embassy. At that time, we were 100 people using the same, so everybody was with this thread. So it goes with communication. It takes time. It takes time because it's not like if you want to put an improvement in one day, you have to work with HRs, you have to work with your boards. And I come again on that decision on boards. You know, it's not a top-down policy, but still, it's very important that the big leaders give the examples. Mm-hmm. For a long time, when I first arrived as an ambassador, it was in the country not very far from here. We had a team of NGOs, and we were trying to put quotas for the next elections. Because, you know, if you have members of parliament who are women, it's somehow easier to convince, when you look at the laws, that you can put soft aspects, soft law into hard law, and you can combine public and private initiatives. But you know, we were a group of embassies, and it's not our role, you know, to say to a country, we want, our law is better than yours, so you have to put quotas in your parliament. So it's always something which is not given in one time, step by step. The French way is very, very strict. We have laws and we have to respect it. But it's because of Napoleon, you know, we had at some point a leader who was not really a Democrat that decided that we would have civil law, we would have this and this and this, and Légion d'honneur as well. At that time, Napoleon did everything, and he did a lot of bad things as well. So I always believe that we have ways to engage on that topic, and especially those kinds of gathering, answering the question, how did you do when you had one of your members who were handicapped? How you're going to do if you are in a panel, for instance, because I'm in this position of recruiting people, I'm asked to do mentorship. How do you do? So you exclude, for instance, a candidate because he's a man? No, of course not. you exclude a person or you favor a person because he's coming, for instance, for trainees. I try not to get trainees who are the kids of my friends. I don't need the kids of my friends to be my trainees. So I try to be part of a civil NGO, which is coming from the suburbs of Paris, and recruit my trainees from that NGOs. But maybe in 10 years it will be discussed. Is it a good thing to do that? I don't know. So it's step-by-step bridges, and it's societal. I don't care about going on a Sunday to a Pride in Thessaloniki. If I can, I go. Because it also helps at some point giving communication on events such as this is very important for the rest of the ecosystem.
Thank
Sorry,
you so
I was
much, Ambassador. And I cannot close this podium of really, really inspired and impressive ladies in the diplomatic field without asking you about your personal experience, of course, as well as sometimes the only woman in the room in many, many occasions. And perhaps looking at the time, if this is perhaps also our last round of interventions, can we also close, maybe or even have some words of encouragement to keep going, not to feel alone, even if we are different in our careers, wherever we work. We would love to hear from your stories. Naomi, could I ask you to share first from your personal career, when you were perhaps the only woman in the room, and what could we take from you as a word of encouragement?
Thank you. Yes, I've often been the only woman in the room. I've often been the only woman that looks like me in the room. In fact, many times when another woman of color comes in the room, I'm surprised. I'm like, why there's two of us now? I think, on the other hand, I've always been extremely lucky, and I think maybe this would be my advice. I've always been extremely lucky with the role models around me. I've had my parents first of all, but also in the workplace, extremely smart, encouraging, critical bosses always. Directors, ambassadors, not all women. I always say this to women who look like me: don't look for someone that looks like you. Try to find a mentor, a coach that doesn't. My most important, valuable coaches have been white males, because they bring something to the table that I don't. They teach me things that I don't know, that I haven't experienced. Try to look for something that is out of your comfort zone and try to learn from him or her. I think that is my most important tip. And hopefully, I think this is, hopefully in a few years when my daughter is my age, we will not be having these discussions anymore because it's commonplace. That is ultimately what I hope to achieve.
Here's to that. What a great vision, that we don't need a diversity in business conference anymore, as you already suggested this morning. Ambassador.
Yes, so my specificity, the fact that we were very little. I mean, when I joined the Foreign Affairs, there were 3% of women ambassadors. When I joined the point where I could become an ambassador, there was 10% women ambassador. So it's not very far from us that things changed. But my specificity was always my asset. As I was so different from everybody. It was an asset. I was chosen all the time because I was different. I was going as a spokesperson to the president or the ministers for 10 years because the journalists were women and the journalists looked like me. They didn't want to have an old diplomat speaking to them, convincing them that the French position was this and this. And it was the second point I want to emphasize, to give hope to everybody. First of all, things change quickly. So don't worry if you are frustrated one day. Everything changes nowadays very quickly. Second thing is be educated, because education is your basis, is your core asset to actually know that there is a prejudice in front of you. You don't care. it's their problem, not yours. You know, last week it was. Sorry, I'm being long, but just this last anecdote. We were at the Chamber of Commerce looking at the brilliant numbers of the Greek economy, and I posted this new number: 10% of industrial production in Greece increase from one year to the others. And it was the only post where I had 50 comments from France. What? Greece? Plus 10% industrial? What is this? So prejudices, stereotypes, you are there as well, so much harm, because you are educated to fight on it. And that's very important in now, in those new times of counter-information. You know, we have fake news every time, so it's an asset to be able to be educated on that.
Thank you so much for these valuable tips and advice. Deputy Ambassador.
So I think my two tips would be to show up, right? And so for everybody who showed up today, you know, showing up is important. I know my ambassador, George Tunis, who's out of the country right now, and I have made a point of marching in every single Pride parade in our 2+ years here in Greece. Greece just recently passed same-sex marriage legislation, and we also participated in the Euro Pride parade up in Thessaloniki earlier this summer. And I think showing up as allies in the struggle for human rights is important. And also, you have to prepare yourself to be uncomfortable. Because when you're showing up for people who are different, whose experience you haven't lived, you're going to make a mistake. You know, when I was up in Europride, it was a 3-hour parade, and I was surrounded by all kinds of people who were celebrating all kinds of different aspects of themselves. And it was incredibly powerful to be walking with that group, but there were moments where I felt uncomfortable, and you just have to kind of own that and say, this is a normal part of being an actual human being, and we're not perfect, but we're trying to do our part.
Thank you so, so much, ambassadors, deputy ambassadors, for your insights, daring to be imperfect, taking small steps, using and looking for mentors who look differently from us, who have a different experience. We heard about your important initiatives here in Greece. Thank you for reaching out, for making diversity and inclusion on your busy agenda such a priority. Let's keep going together. I hope this has been an inspiration for all of you, and also for this conference to keep discussing how we can make diversity and inclusion happen. Thank you very much, Excellencies, and thank you very much to you.